Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, and having real, honest conversations about what it looks like to lead the next generation. I'm Sarah, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Crystal.
Hi.
Ashley.
Hello.
And Chef.
Hey, everybody.
And today on the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast, we're going to be discussing what you need to know about Generation Z. So in case there's anybody who doesn't know what Generation Z is, what are the years we're looking at here, the ages? What includes Generation Z?
Generation Z is defined as kids who were born in 1995 or later, which means the oldest Gen Zers are 22. They just graduated from college. But I would say that anytime it's the bubble generation, like right at the end or right at the beginning, they don't have all the characteristics. I'm a bubble generation kid right between Gen X and the millennial generation. I don't have all the characteristics of either. So I would say for the purposes of our conversation, Generation Z is really kids who are seniors in high school and below.
Okay. So why does it matter that we start examining the way that Generation Z functions and works and exists in their social context, in their cultural context, ministry context, all of it? Why does it matter?
I think it's important to know their values, what they find is most important, because if it doesn't align with what we value as ministry leaders or small group leaders, I think that could have like severe implications for the outcome of those relationships or our view on those relationships.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think when people talk about generations, what they're not really talking about age. What they're talking about is culture and beliefs and, like Ashley said, values and practices. And I think anytime we intend to do ministry with a culture that's not our own, we have to learn a lot about that culture. If I were going to move to a different country and do ministry there, I would learn to speak their language and I would learn what matters to them and what's offensive to them. And that's true when we're leading a different generational culture as well.
You know, I love the visual or the movie 21 Jump Street, because I think that, you know, this is what Marco Stryker talked about on our episode a few episodes ago or many episodes ago. But just the idea of, you know, going undercover into another culture and then operating as though the rules haven't changed or the cultural norms haven't changed, and you just become ineffective. So in a lot of ways, we're constantly programming to what worked yesterday.
Right.
Because we were around yesterday, and in many ways, we're kind of lagging behind. So we have to pay attention to stay relevant, not with the truth of what we're talking about and not with what we're talking about, but with how we're talking about it.
Well, I think what you said, that was an important distinction, that I think sometimes it can be confusing when we say a word like relevance, that we are watering down something to make it relevant, but it can appeal to a new generation while also still being true and foundational.
Right. And I think a lot of times someone who listens to somebody and uses the term watered down, you know, it doesn't hit them as hard because they operate by a different value system.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'm trying to get kids to feel that same punch you felt years ago that they're not going to feel if you talk about it the way you talked about it or they talked about it with you when you were a kid or whatever. But, you know, it's just so important. And I think the other frustrating thing about it, you know, as somebody who worked in middle school for years, is people always ask me, do you survey your middle schoolers? I'm like, heck no. Like, they don't know and everything. I mean, they don't know what they want.
Right.
And so it really takes a skilled eye to be paying attention constantly about what it is that they're responding to well, and we just need to study it. The good news is we live in a world where you know, a capitalistic country, and they spend billions of dollars. So people are paying close attention. And I think this is a great opportunity for us as the church to, you know, kind of lean in on the business side of things and just see what they're talking about, what's selling, so that we can understand the sort of things that motivate a kid.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, years and years ago, a youth pastor I was serving with said, hey, this generation we're serving is different than previous generations. Can you just go do some research and find out why? And so I did. I did lots of Googling, which is always effective to find accurate information. And I came across this idea of generational change, and it brought me to Generation Y, which was eventually renamed as millennials. And it was just so helpful. But all the information that I found was not from the church.
Right.
It was always from marketing organizations.
Yeah.
And in fact, at the time, there was a website that just talked about what is trending with this generation right now, because they're so driven by getting the disposable income of teenagers.
You know, it's as a teacher, one of the things people ask me about, like, what prepped me to be a student pastor, and I was like, I basically steeped in their culture as a teacher for 8 hours a day, and they talk like you're not there. And if you become a student of them, you can learn so much about it. So as a teacher, who's trying to get kids motivated about whether it was calculus or physics or whatever I was teaching that day, was like, I'm trying to figure out ways to connect with them. But the good news was I could just watch, and then there were even some kids I could just ask, like, did that work or did that not work? Those sorts of things. I know, Crystal, you and Ashley, you were
they're all
teachers for years, and it's just so interesting.
One of my favorite things that I've done in recent years was, because I've been out of the classroom for about 5 years now, is I go back to substitute teach on occasion.
Right.
And for the money.
Oh, yeah. Super for the money.
Always
Listen,
$49.
I could buy lunch for that. No.
It's because of the nice way they treat you when you're a substitute teacher.
It's all the respect I get.
And honor.
But no, it's so great to spend a day with actual teenagers who are not in a church and who act differently when they're not in a church.
Right.
And you can ask them anything you want, because your only job is to keep them alive and out of jail that day. Like, there aren't a lot of expectations for actual learning.
Right.
So I'll always ask the question while I'm there, what are some things that adults say that you don't say? Or what are some things that adults think you say or think you like that you actually don't? And it is so clarifying.
That is a great question.
Every time that happens, because they'll be like, oh, adult guys keep calling me bro, and that's weird and old. And I'm like, oh, it is? It's weird and old? Okay, thanks.
Right.
So it seems like some of the things that we would notice about this next generation would only make sense when compared to the generation before it. So what are some of the things that we've noticed about the millennial generation, how Generation Z is different?
I just recently watched this simulcast by Barna, which was talking about their new release. They were studying Gen Z and trying to figure out that very thing. And that was what was most interesting to me, was, since I am a millennial, how are these teenagers different than the people who are currently leading them? Because I think that's so important. And to me, what stuck out the most was really the reality that they really are a blank slate. They're considered the first post-Christian generation to exist.
Yeah.
And I was thinking the implications that would mean for us as youth pastors, and the influence and the importance of what we do is more important than ever. And the influence potential that we have is greater than ever. And the other thing that I thought was most important, I remember they showed this one graph where they talked about millennials. When they asked millennials what their primary mark of adulthood was, their answer was typically emotional maturity, where Generation Z answers financial independence. And
Generation Millennial answers, or Z? Z answers financial. You're kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's so interesting.
A lot of the data was showing just how important performance was to this generation, and education, and the way they find their identity and success is so much in the way they're performing.
Which we talked about just a couple of days ago in a creative meeting. We were saying how it used to feel like the anxiety put on students, or the students were feeling, was coming in the more affluent areas, or stuff that their parents are putting on depending on where they were growing up. But that it really has become a cross-cultural phenomenon, this anxiety, especially, and that makes sense if they're driven by
about what is next and setting yourself up.
Yeah.
And that makes so much sense, because I think every generation in some ways is shaped by the crisis that they experienced as children. And the crisis that this generation experienced was the 2007-2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, the recession.
And they saw families losing homes, and families who made maybe poor financial decisions or great financial decisions
and still
experiencing extreme instability. And I think that really shaped what they said, I'm going to do different when I grow up.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I had a volunteer who worked with a company, and he kind of sent me a internal copy of their marketing research that they had done on this generation. And they said the most interesting thing. They said that this generation is the generation that's most like them are the baby boomers. Which I thought was interesting. And then it made the point that they have watched the generation before them, everybody getting a trophy for everything, and they just don't buy that anymore. They don't want to be given a trophy unless they've earned it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And that they, and I guess that goes straight to the hard work thing.
Yeah.
You know, that they're going to achieve on their own, and they don't want someone basically blowing sunshine, you know?
Yeah, I was reading an article just about the importance of being real with Generation Z and how they have no tolerance for something that's fake. And they've even done studies on it. Like in 2014, American Eagle implemented this no Photoshop policy, and they saw their sales like increase dramatically. And I just think that's so interesting, the importance of, I mean, it's actually made me rethink. You and I, Crystal, were talking about how we do
just talked about
communicator videos and how natural does it look?
I mean, that's something that I think has huge implications for our programming.
Yeah.
Because if kids are naturally suspicious of anything that's overproduced, we have to be really careful to not only program authentically, but then to live authentically when we're off stage. I see this in my small group all the time. They're obsessed with things that I think that is so poorly done. Like, why would you watch a video that is edited so badly together and it looks like this person's just staring into their computer like screen? What are you doing? but to them, that's a mark of this is real or this is authentic. It's not overproduced.
Yeah.
No one's trying to sell me on it.
Yeah.
But if you're standing on stage and you're talking as though, you know, you're not perfect. I know I've had several, over the years, several youth pastors come observe or I'll speak or something. And I can't tell you how many times someone said, I can't believe you're so honest with them about, you know, things that I worked on or struggled with, or, you know, and that I'm still not perfect in certain things. And I'm like, well, I mean, again, I steeped in their generation for 10, 11 years teaching. And if you're not authentic, they don't trust you.
It's so true.
And the church, for how long, has just, you know, I mean, the whole scene of driving in with your minivan and dad turning around or mom turning around or whoever, grandpa turning around, whoever it is saying, we're going to be a family that gets along.
Yeah.
You know,
even though you
just
just had your
doesn't
biggest
work.
fight in the car.
Right.
It doesn't work for them. They don't connect. They don't trust it, which may be one of the reasons we're seeing them leave.
I saw this with one of the girls in my own small group, and maybe I talk about this particular group of girls a lot. They're the ones I'm living with and doing life with right this second. And we had a series at church that I thought was hyper relevant. I thought it was right on point. It utilized sort of a Snapchat theme, which I thought, great job. And a 15-year-old girl walks into my small group and says, well, that was a stretch to be relevant.
Wow. They could tell we were trying to.
I had nothing to say.
Oh my gosh.
That's amazing.
Because you had the same thought.
But what do you think?
I thought this is great. And she just blew it to bits.
Did you ask her at all? I mean, how did that go?
I saw heads nodding around the room, first of all, and I went, okay, tell me more. And she goes, well, it's just obvious that they're trying to connect with teenagers by using Snapchat. Like, we haven't seen that before. And I was like, oh, man, this makes everything we do a little bit tougher.
Speaking of Snapchat, that just made me think of Instagram and Facebook and how the story has become so much more popular than the posting.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of the story is that this is real, this is life. And it's not necessarily like how you're trying to portray your life, which are what the posts feel like they are.
Is that why they have their other accounts? It's because they know their parents can't handle, you know, they've got to do that for survival. But for their friends, they've also got to have this other one to be authentic and be like, you know, both sides. You also understand why I need that highlight reel out there for grandma. But the reality is, you know, this is who I am. These two accounts are who I am.
That's something I have noticed about this generation that I think is really interesting. I mean, we're all a reaction to the generation before us, right? We're all sort of a reaction to our parents. And research shows us that the millennials are the most collaborative culture that has ever been. And these students are the opposite of that. They go underground with social media. So we saw everything take a turn from MySpace and Facebook. It's all out there. Everything I think is on Twitter, to underground and pictures that disappear and private conversations and direct messages and private texting groups. And everything they do has gone underground, I think, because they saw the mistakes of the last generation. And they were warned by people like us not to make those mistakes.
I hadn't thought of that. That's so interesting. I was reading this report by Google, and they mentioned, and I know that any study on a generation, it's so hard to like land on a number because I feel like it constantly changes as they learn more about that generation and they get older. But This study said that 70% of teen YouTube subscribers saw their favorite YouTube influencers as more relatable and more influential than traditional celebrities, which is so opposite, I think, of the millennial culture,
For sure.
where we look to celebrities and they're like, nah, no big deal. That's fake.
Right.
I want YouTube, which to them is more real.
Yeah.
Right. Micro influencers. Hey, I found a YouTube statistic too that I just thought was too interesting. The Generation Z has an average attention span of 8 seconds, which is now shorter than most YouTube ads. So YouTube is having to rethink their ad strategy because the attention span is that short.
That if you haven't caught me in 8 seconds, I have clicked
Because
to move past
their
you.
attention span was shaped, I think, by Vine, which was 6 seconds.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Well,
I just thought that was neat.
I mean, I have a 14-year-old that, I mean, it's the YouTube, and a 12-year-old, and it's the YouTube, those videos with, and I listen to them like, like I can't stand that person's voice or the way they're doing that or something like that. And I'm, because I have never seen it, I just hear it behind me in the car or whatever. But I mean, Casey Neistat, I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff. He's just, my 14-year-old thinks he's the greatest thing. I mean, and he's on there in a ripped t-shirt and messing around. I mean, I kind of like some of the stuff, but so we have this brilliant person on staff. Her name is Casey Lanier, and she told me yesterday that YouTube behind Google is the second biggest search engine on the internet.
That's
I
fascinating.
believe it.
Insane.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Forget instruction booklets. Just go to YouTube.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I wonder,
Absolutely.
Anyway, it's nuts.
That is interesting. Ashley, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the information you saw in Barna, and you said that this generation is more of a blank slate than any other generation before. And I thought
driving me crazy.
that
had
is
a lot
so
to say?
interesting to me.
No, I have so many questions.
Well, I listened to the same simulcast that you did and looked through some of those charts, and I thought it interesting because the generation before, they've had a negative perception of church. So if they were coming back, they were trying to undo some kind of baggage or something that church has done to them. But this generation has no imprint from the church at all.
Right.
And so that leads to a lot of interesting possibilities for what the church can do.
Yeah. The whole model,
us.
the whole model of trying to create an environment that would draw them in or whatever, or convince them that they should, we don't need to necessarily do that. I mean, but the other thing that's different is I feel like my generation felt like if we show up, they're going to expect us to come back next week. This generation's like, if I show up, I don't care. Right? I mean, it's such a consumer, you're not signing up for anything if you show up one week.
Which we've noticed in attendance numbers with churches as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, over the course of a year, kids are coming about 50% of the time is the average.
Oh, no.
No, it's
Or less
way
than
less
that.
than that.
Way
even
less
now.
than that.
Yeah.
Oh, the attendance well, and the technology side of things, the fact that churches are available online, the kids are coming less often. But the one thing that was interesting that I was starting to see as I was finishing up at North Point was especially first timers. First timers could come once and then disappear for 6 months and show up again.
Yeah.
And then so it usually took like 18 to 24 months of them showing up 2 or 3 times before they decided this is something I want to do. But they may have liked it, but they're not going to show up necessarily the next week.
Yeah.
It might be 6 months. And so the way we need to think about our host teams or whoever it is sitting out at the desk, and if we keep names so that they don't have to sign up every single time, we just need to change.
But what
the way
you
we
said, I
think about
thought was
those.
interesting. That means we don't necessarily need to be creating these super inviting environments, or it doesn't need to be driven by a feel of an environment.
Well, I think, they still the number one thing a kid wants in the room is more students. I don't think that's changed.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the number, climbing walls, neat, coffee shops, cool.
Right.
Are there people there? That's
Right.
what
That's
I
a
want to know.
developmental desire, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
And they're still asking the question, like, is this for me?
Yeah.
Is this for me?
Right,
And I
but
think our environments have to communicate that.
But I
Well-
think that maybe is the question for millennials, was it more, am I being entertained?
No, I don't think
not
it's
as
their
much
question.
that?
I think it's our approach. Our approach of convincing them that they should come here, or convincing them that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, is the mistake.
Is the
because
mistake.
right then and there, I'm going, well, if I'm just showing up and somebody tells me, well, it's not as bad as it used to be, I'm going,
I didn't know what it used to be.
yeah. And if it's not as bad, it still must be pretty bad. So I mean, and I've always felt that like, oh no, we're church people, but we're not like most church people. Well,
So
I don't
what
know
are
any
they
church
looking
people
for?
I don't like,
Yeah, what does that even mean?
What are the needs that are driving them, that would drive them to go to a church, that they could find something in church that they wouldn't find someplace else? What is it that we have to offer this generation?
I love that this generation cares so much about authenticity. And I think that's something that the church has to offer, if we do it right, is an authentic message from an authentic Savior surrounded by authentic community.
Right.
What could be more enticing than that?
Right.
Well, and I think, a big push is, I walked in a church the other day and it said a community of believers, ... And I thought, well, if I'm not a believer and I walked in
then
here,
I'm out.
then
Right.
I'm clearly an outsider from the moment I walked in the door. So can we create an environment where people can, and this is tough, belong before they believe? Again, this has come up several times in our podcasts, but this isn't new. Every generation, every kid wants a place to belong.
Right.
So can we offer belonging in the church?
Well, and I think even more the technology piece. They're so connected. We know this. They're so connected, but their ability to have relationships with depth face to face is lacking. And so that's something the church will be able to always offer that technology can't.
This is something that we're trying to figure out, right? And by we, I am trying to figure out in the group that I'm leading right now. Is I have girls in significant friendships and significant relationships with people who live across the planet. And help coaching them through that, not just in a don't do that because it might be a scary person on the other side, but in reality, it really might just be another teenager, and this is the world you live in, and these are real relationships. I have one with a boyfriend across the country, which as her leader has its advantages. I'm like, that's not the worst thing. Yeah. But how do I coach you into having authentic and safe habits, right? Authentic relationships and safe habits. This is a brand new frontier for us.
Yeah.
If it's true that a parent is the number one influence on a student's spiritual walk, that would mean, these students, if they are post-Christian, if their parents haven't raised them in church or raised them with Christian values, that would mean we can't really do ministry apart, right?
Yeah.
From partnering with parents.
Right.
That's true.
Because clearly whether a student admits it or not, that their parent is a spiritual influence for the positive or for the negative, I'm not sure a student would even be self-aware enough to know if they are. I would imagine that means more than ever.
Yeah.
If we're not reaching parents.
Well, and what's interesting in that study, the biggest frustration that student pastors or youth pastors had was the uninvolvement of parents.
Right. Which makes sense why they're uninvolved.
Right. Right.
Why does it make sense that they're not involved?
Well, because if their
I'm a little
parents...
slower on the uptake.
No, you're good.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm still... I really am just
so
processing
excited.
a lot of this information.
Yeah.
Well, you're a processor.
Again, thank you. I appreciate you understand me, Chef.
Sure. But I'm processing too.
the same.
Okay.
So why would parents be less involved?
Well, if they themselves aren't as involved in church or their faith.
Okay.
Yes, parents.
Because of technology or whatever it is.
Or
having
just
a bad
because,
experience at
as
church.
trends in the last 4 or 5 generations are showing,
Right.
more and more people are walking away from their faith or are less and less involved.
Right.
And so it would make sense to me why parents wouldn't be as motivated to be involved if their kid was at church because they were maybe never involved themselves.
Right.
Right. And if students are looking for an authentic expression to faith, their parents are really the best potential display for that. So to get parents not only invested in the spiritual development of their child, but invested in their own personal spiritual development could have farther reaching implications than maybe it has before.
Yeah. Can I keep going back to the blank slate thing?
Yes.
What does that mean? So you're saying they have no feeling about Christianity or the church or scripture or...
Now, I am really not even close to an expert on generation
Right.
Tell us,
so this
Ashley.
is just what
Tell
I
us
understand
everything.
as of today.
Right.
That the blank slate, when they were referring to that, is they don't necessarily have even a negative viewpoint of church or Christianity as much as they just don't even have
They don't have a
thought about it.
Right.
Whereas the
Right.
generation before that maybe pushed up against I have more of a negative look at the
Reactionary.
church.
Or a
more
negative or
reactionary.
a... Yeah. So, culturally, again, youth culture is normally a reaction to what's going on, right? But I mean, up until this, I mean, blank slate, really. I mean, so the Bible, does it have authority? Does it not have authority? Or is it just more information amongst all the information they can have?
I think it's just more information.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the feeling I got from.
That has implications about how we talk about
It totally does.
Scripture.
Yes.
Yeah. If we want them to take it seriously, we've got to, wow.
And I would imagine that number's also changed because family makeups have changed so much in generations.
Yeah. But Chef, what you were just saying, how we talk about Scripture, I keep going back to that piece of authenticity. I think that gives us permission to talk about the Bible in a very real way, as having written by very real people, and the kind of the struggles that show up in there with humanity. And I think that gives us permission.
And that they weren't perfect.
Yeah. It gives us permission to talk about this book and the people that wrote it and make it up in a more holistic way instead of just like this manual.
Right.
It's good.
I heard my pastor this week talked about that the last generation had a respect for the Bible. They didn't read it,
right?
But it was a big white book on grandma's coffee table that you don't put drinks on top of. And the Bible is important. And now the big white books are gone because they're on your phone. It's become information, just like any other bit of information. And so to lean into that it has some sort of authority, that it does, the authority it has for you, being from the last generation, that there is a reverence we have for it.
It's not there.
They don't have a reverence for it yet. And that maybe our job is to back up and help them see it as more than.
That's fascinating.
That's hard to do.
Right.
I'm looking at a fact right now that I think is so fascinating that may or may not be related to this part of the conversation, but I can't get past it because we're all shaped by the books that we read, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at the last generation, the generation of millennials, the books they read as teenagers were categorized as fantasy. And when you look at the current generation, the books they read as teenagers are categorized as dystopian, which is basically like post-apocalyptic, broken realities.
I thought that was like a brontosaurus.
Can you define that for those of us who work in middle school?
Right.
So dystopian literature is basically like broken world, like Hunger Games, Maze Runner. But this makes sense when you look at a millennial and the implications for us is I live in a world where fantasy is the standard. So when I see something broken, I'm out. This is hard. But a Gen Z kid who grows up reading in worlds that are already broken, when they see broken or difficult, it's like, well, okay. It's not a complete turnoff. I think that makes our job easier.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if, as a millennial, I expect everything's perfect, and I walk into a church and I meet broken people, my first thought is I should just walk out.
Yeah. I'm not broken.
Because this is awful.
Right.
But if I come into the church with a sense of the world is broken, I mean, I almost understand the gospel better from the outset, right? And I meet broken people and go, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's good.
You know, one other thing, I was reading this article on the difference between marketing to millennials and marketing to Gen Z. And I know that they're talking specifically about marketing here, but I think that we can learn a lot as the church. And they talked about how Generation Z expects businesses, brands, and retailers to be loyal to them.
Oh.
And if they don't feel appreciated, they'll just move on to something else. Because millennials will be, millennials and what's before that?
Generation X.
And Generation X, it's more about them being loyal to the business. So it's kind of flipped, which in church context, that would be rather than them coming to us, it would be us going to them in this generation. That's what they would feel more valued because we're more loyal to them.
Yeah. I like that idea.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
I think it's great. And when you think about, we used to talk about small group leaders showing up,
right?
Like showing up at a ball game, showing up. I mean, it's always meant something, but to this generation, it means more. It's just another argument for contextualized ministry and smaller groups and trying to make small churches out of big churches, and that kids know somebody and that, an adult shows up and speaks into their world. And I think, this is a generation that feels like that they might have something to say, or that, that, and where else are there organizations training people to lean in and say, what do you think? Or, and I mean, nobody else. They get talked at all day because the school system's 3 generations behind.
I was going to say, I don't know if
you know what I mean?
much.
Yeah, I mean, or 10 generations behind.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a result of the Industrial Revolution. You know, you sit in rows, you get your stuff done, and we're still, trying to get out of fluorescent lights, even though we've known for 25 years it's terrible for thinking. But it's cheap, right? So that's why we do it. Same way, like as churches, we can adjust faster, though. And you can adjust faster the smaller the context. So, this whole idea of a small group-based ministry with an adult who cares, who leans in, who is, what was the word you used? Not necessarily loyal or to them, or the other way, maybe the sort of thing that can unlock the key.
I think that's a key word to keep in mind.
And a real
loyalty.
person. A real person.
Yeah, authentic, loyal.
I think
Loyal,
you bring-
and the direction of loyalty. I think
Yes.
that is huge.
Yeah.
I think one of the pitfalls we fall into in each generation is using technology as a way to connect with them. Like if I can just understand the technology, if I can just use it, it will make me cool. I remember in the classroom working with some teachers who felt like, and this was 10 years ago, so we had millennials in the classroom, they felt like an assignment using email was cutting edge. And the kids would be so excited, and they didn't understand why the kids weren't excited that they got to write an email on paper, printed out, and hand it to the teacher, which was already amazing to me. And I said, well, the new technology when you were growing up was a microwave.
Right.
How excited would you have been if that was your assignment, right? It wasn't new to you. It was just a tool.
Right.
And email's what their parents use. It's just a tool. And I feel like with this generation who grew up in a time where they had screens everywhere and everything was smart, and they were 4 years old when the iPhone came out, for them, it's just a tool. We're not newer or cooler because we use this app or that app or this technology or that technology. So our best bet as leaders who couldn't keep up with the technology even if we wanted to is to go for authenticity.
As we were talking about social media, and when Ashley's talking about loyalty, it makes me wonder if I'm using social media right. I am out there giving them information that I think they should read, or should I be making a big deal of them through my social media, leveraging my platform for them from the loyalty, And I do remember, one of the prizes we would give was that they would get, if they won a game, they would get a picture in front of this thing, and we would post it on Instagram, and we had, lots of followers, and they loved that. Like that was a big deal to them. And maybe we, got lucky on that one.
Sense.
That's interesting. So for what we know about Generation Z so far, what are some of the takeaways that we can have when it comes to ministry and ministering to them?
I think one of the takeaways for me is that this is a new thing, and it won't be the last new thing that we encounter. I mean, if anything, research is teaching us that generations are showing up faster than they ever have before because technology is advancing faster and it's affecting culture faster. So generations are actually getting shorter and shorter. So in 10 years, we'll be adjusting to a new generation. And this is really a skill that we have to sharpen as leaders. We have to get good at adjusting culturally. And I would say part of that is we have to, as leaders, resist the temptation to see a generation change as something negative. Because as a millennial, I am sick to death of hearing people complain about millennials. And I know Generation X, who is currently complaining about millennials, thank you very much, was sick to death at one point of hearing the boomers talk badly about them. And eventually we'll be annoyed at those Gen Z whippersnappers as well. But I think, can I say whippersnappers? You just said whippersnappers.
I think you just jumped to the boomer generation.
Sorry, I just became
Way to
100 years
represent
old.
all of them.
Sorry. But the whole point is this is a good thing. And we can embrace it as a unique opportunity, or we can embrace it as a terrible disadvantage.
Well, it is an opportunity. Every issue like this is an opportunity. And we have got to get better at stepping back and thinking, okay, this is real. I can complain about it, or I can figure out where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
And I mean, they want to be authentic. What an opportunity.
Yes.
That's what we're trying to get people to do, that we don't have to be perfect. What an opportunity.
Great.
You know what I mean? Like, that is so good. We can talk about scripture, and really dig into the context of scripture and what an opportunity.
I felt like the things that I saw over and over again in the Barna report were, this is a post-Christian world.
Yeah.
And I
think
see
that's
that
the blank slate, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the blank
I
slate.
see that could be a negative thing, but I think you're right. I think it's a really positive thing too. I don't think that that's as depressing as it sounds for us when it comes to reaching students.
Right.
Ashley, anything you want to add?
I think it's important to consider the fact that what's important to this generation is okay. Like, it's okay that their most important thing is education or financial independence. And that's not necessarily, like you guys said, a bad thing.
Right.
But it is learning how to come alongside that and still teach like truth and principles wrapped around what is important to them and how do they find their identity in Christ in the midst of valuing something like education and their job in such a important manner.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
I think that just as leaders of this generation, we have got to get real comfortable with, one, we have to figure out what we think is timeless and the message we want to teach. We have to be comfortable and confident in the fact that we're not changing the truth we're teaching. We're just changing the approach. And we also have to get comfortable with the fact that there may be generations who don't understand. And then they may say to us, like, why are you not teaching the truth? Well, I am teaching you know what I mean? But they're uncomfortable because they don't feel the weight of it. We're not trying to have them feel the weight of it. This is not directed at you. I remember I used to have the parents come in and watch, our program. And one of my favorite lines was, "What did you think? You didn't love it? That's okay.
Yeah.
It's not for you."
Like, that's actually a good sign.
Yeah.
And it is a good sign. And if you are programming
wrong.
so that, an older generation is happy with it,
right,
you're going to miss this generation.
Man,
and
what a proactive move, though, to do that.
Well, gosh, cool. I mean, if you're leading, people won't understand. If you don't have anybody that's looking in at what you're doing that doesn't understand you or isn't asking questions, or maybe they're just not mad at you, you're not leading. You're just
doing the status quo.
You're just doing what's going to keep you out of trouble. And that's not enough for this next generation.
That's good.
I think it's important also to think about how you're defining spiritual maturity.
Yes.
Like, is it, when you look at these numbers when it comes to Generation Z, are you looking at like who's actually attending church? Because then when you actually look at the personality of Generation Z, you would understand why they're not necessarily attending, but they want you to come to them in a way.
Yeah.
And in past generations, maybe it was, getting married or having kids, which would be a mark of spiritual maturity, doesn't necessarily mean that is what spiritual maturity is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like what Chef was saying, the markers are going to be different for this generation. And that doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
It's different. That's great. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we've talked a lot about the simulcast that Barna put on and the book Gen Z that they've made. So we're going to have links to all of those in the show notes, but we also want to do a giveaway for that book as well. So follow us on Instagram at XP3 Students to make sure that you are able to participate in that. Thanks for joining us for the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love you to subscribe to the podcast through your podcast app. And while you're there, we would love for you to leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing and what we can do to make this podcast better. If you want to dive deeper into what we talked about today and to check out our show notes and links to resources mentioned in this episode, visit our website, rethinkingym.org. Until next time, thank you for listening.